of our hemoglobin molecule. And it doesn't take much for us to have a variation in our normal chains. There are approximately 400 identified hemoglobin variants. Of those, probably 95% of them are absolutely, positively asymptomatic. They're just a glitch. They're clinically insignificant. We found them because we were looking for other things. The hemoglobinopathies are inherited. You can get a rare one that you'll find that somebody just had a little transcription error or something when they were putting together a protein, but for the most part, these things are inherited. The globin gene alters the structure or the rate of synthesis of the globin chains, and that's going to be our thalassemias on that second part. Who remembers what chromosomes control our globin chains?
11, 16.
16 and 11. Okay. Malfunctions of 16 are significantly more significant. Significantly more significant, that's a real are significantly more hazardous than those of 11. Normal hemoglobin contains about 95% A, about give or take a little bit 2% A2, and then somewhere less than 2% of hemoglobin F. In the inherited disease states, it's very important to know whether you're heterozygous or homozygous. In homozygous, you have 2 copies of the defective gene. As a matter of fact, when we get into the alphas, you're going to have 4 copies you're dealing with. But the homozygous is generally worse. In sickle cell particularly, even trait though is symptomatic. This is some things that can happen. I'm not going to quiz you on this. This is basic protein metabolism. It's not really strictly to hemoglobins. The substitution of one amino acid for another. And you might as well learn this one because I can pretty much guarantee this is one that pops up a lot. Sickle cell anemia is caused by a single substitution of valine for glutamic acid at position 6 of the beta chain. So all it takes is one amino acid different in that protein chain, and it changes the whole nature of the hemoglobin. We can substitute more than one amino acid. Hemoglobin C, Harlem, has a glutamic acid that replaces both valine and aspartate for aspirin for that one. Okay, so we can have multiple changes. We can delete one. In hemoglobin Leiden, the glutamic acid doesn't get included where it's supposed to be. You can have a fusion of hemoglobin chains. These tend to occur in like our thalasssemias where you don't have enough chains produced. And so the other ones kind of hook up together to do whatever they can to overcome the problem. You can also see an extension of the amino acid chain. For some reason, hemoglobin constant spring throws an extra 31 amino acids on the end. And amino acids are like Legos. So in some of these things, it doesn't really matter if you put one in or not, no. This is just the things that can happen. Clinically significant variants, sickle cell syndromes such as AS, which is sickle cell trait, SS, which is sickle cell disease, and SC, which is sickle cell / hemoglobin C disease. We can have certain unstable hemoglobins such as congenital Heinz body anemias. That's probably about all we're going to talk about those. We can have hemoglobins with abnormal oxygen affinity. Okay, so in other words, perhaps one of those substitutions means that this particular hemoglobin doesn't bind oxygen in the same way as other ones. We talked about with 2,3-DPG that the molecule has to kind of be bendy. It's got to be a little flexible to let the oxygen in and out. So if we have a substitution in our globin chain, maybe it's too bendy or it's not bendy enough or it doesn't bend the right way so that all of our chemicals line up for the 2,3-DPG. to hook in there. We have M hemoglobins, and then we have certain structural variants, such as the beta thals and the alpha thals, and we will talk about those quite a bit. Hemoglobin electrophoresis, and I'm going to let Barb talk to you a lot more about electrophoresis, but, let's see, did I remember? Oh good, I did remember to put pictures on this time. What we basically do, we apply blood to a phoresis gel, and when we say gel, it looks like a piece of paper, but it's been soaked in a material, an acetate, and an agar usually. And what we do is we put the blood on there, we stick it in a nice little water bath, and we zap it with some electricity. And the electricity runs from one direction to the other. So based on polarity and valence and a couple of other things, it's going to make those hemoglobins travel. After a certain period of time, they're going to deposit. Okay? And based on where they fall out at, we compare them with a known, and so we know what kind of hemoglobins you have. So basically what we have is, I know that if I'm doing an alkaline, here's the alkaline, here's the acid. If I put my controls on here, I put a controls for each of these types of hemoglobin. Okay? So my A is here, my F is here, S, D, and G are here, and A, C, E, and O are here. So if I look at this patient, these are my, this is hemoglobin A, this is hemoglobin S, and this is hemoglobin C. Okay? Here's my hemoglobin F. So if I put my patients in here, you see we have a little bit of hemoglobin F here, we have hemoglobin S, and we have hemoglobin A. So whatever travels the same distance, that's what type of hemoglobin it is. And based on whether we're in an alkaline or an acid plate, they're going to travel different distances. Okay, so like on this one here, these all travel to the same place, but if you look over here, they travel different places, so we can differentiate them out. That's all we're talking about. The main thing to remember about hemoglobin electrophoresis is we can't confirm a hemoglobinopathy without the phoresis. Probably the most well-known and the most widespread hemoglobinopathy is sickle cell. Sickle cell is an abnormal substitution of valine for glutamic acid at position 6 of the beta chain. You might as well just get used to saying that. Okay. It is a normochromic normocytic anemia. Unfortunately, because of the complications of this, it frequently winds up with renal problems, and there's iron deficiency and other things that go with it. So it may often present as a microhypo. Does that make sense? Technically, it's classified as a normocytic normochromic, but many sickle cell patients have microcytic cells because of co-committed other types of problems with their hemoglobin. Basically what happens is these cells get destroyed at an abnormal rate. It is found in those of African descent, and about 8 to 10% of all African Americans have the trait. East St. Louis used to be one of the biggest areas for sickle cell anemia, and it still is quite significantly. Clinical presentation, our usual anemia symptoms, you're going to be tired, you're going to be weak. Bone growth changes. People with sickle cell anemia, full on disease, tend to be shorter of stature, a little bit stockier. They may have joint pain, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. They often have heart problems, and as a matter of fact, one of the leading causes of death is something called chest syndrome, and that's where it starts to have problems with their heart. They tend to be more prone to infection. There is definitive splenomegaly until they take it out, which they do in most full sickle cell patients. They can have leg ulcers, and they often are often subject to central nervous system disorders like stroke. And what's really sad is that stroke is most common in little children in sickle cell patients. We have a normochromic normocytic anemia. We're going to see polychromasia. We're going to see sickle cells, target cells, And frankly, once they do the splenectomy, we're gonna see a little of everything. Anything I've got in there that's pretty much a really ugly morphology, we see Pappenheimer bodies, we see Pal-Jolly bodies, we see ovalocytes, we see target cells, pretty much everything but spherocytes. And what we have here, this is a sickle cell. What shape is hemoglobin normally? Kind of round and blobby, right? What happens in sickle cell is when it is induced to sickle, and we'll talk about what causes that in a minute, the chains polymerize. So instead of this nice little blobby molecule floating around, what you wind up with, it goes like this, and you get these long fibers causing the red cell to pull out into this sickling shape, this thin shape. This is a really unpleasant disease. It is horrible to have. I've seen some patients who have very severe disease who are just miserable a lot, and it is horrible. So why would something that is so horrible and so deadly proliferate? You know, according to the theory of evolution, things that are bad should disappear, right? Well, what happens in this, Plasmodium falciparum especially, but all of our plasmodiums, and does anybody remember what plasmodium is? We talked about maybe it's cell review. It's malaria. So basically what happens with malaria, it invades and lives within the cell. So if I sickle, the malaria can't get in there. So these cells are resistant to malaria. And most of the people who, you know, the ancestors of those who have sickle cell came from malaria-rich areas. So people with sickle cell, even though it's a horrible disease in and of itself, they survived the malaria, which killed many more people than the sickle cell did. So this made them immune to malaria, and therefore the gene kept on going. We will see an extremely increased reticulocyte count in these patients, and I've seen it as high as 35% retics. So, way, way high. What happens is these sickle cells are particularly fragile. So if you just think about these cells, how does a red cell get through a capillary? It sort of morphs and, you know, does the blob number. Those things don't blob good. So they have a tendency to block the capillaries. They just look painful. But they have a tendency to block the capillaries, which restricts blood flow to a variety of areas in the body. What causes them to sickle is a decrease in oxygen tension. So anytime the oxygen tension goes down, not only do their kidneys secrete erythropoietin, but the cells sickle. Because when the malaria invades, the oxygen tension goes down because the malaria takes over the red cells, so they can't deliver their oxygen. Every time we have a storm front come through, all the sicklers come in. When the barometric pressure drops, we'll see all of them. Oh, look at the big storms. I know we're going to see Bob and Susie and Tom and Letitia, and you know, we know their names. So we know that they're going to be coming in because that drop in barometric pressure causes the cells to sickle. They don't recommend that you become a mountain climber if you have sickle cell, or a deep sea diver. Flying, because the cabin's pressurized, it's okay, but skydiving, probably not a good idea. How do we treat them? We provide supportive therapy, hydroxyurea or butyrate therapies. They've tried a variety of different things. You have to help them prevent infections, so try and keep that down. It says bone marrow transplantation, but that's very, very rare. That's not usually the best or the first that they go to. We used to transfuse our sickle cell patients a lot, and they have more recently found that it's better to keep them a little bit anemic, not keep them, but to allow them to remain a little bit anemic than to transfuse them all the time. And one of the big reasons for that is the multiple transfusions. For some reason, people with sickle cell have a tendency to form abnormal antibodies. And you'll get into blood bank and get all of this, but usually you have anti-A and anti-B. Those are normal. You're supposed to have these. Some of these sickle cell patients, every time you give them a new unit of blood, they make a new antibody. And if you have an abnormal antibody, you can't have blood that has that on it. So it makes it more and more and more and more difficult for us to find blood. We have one family, we won't refer to them by name. I mean, not just because of HIPAA, and I'm trying not to tell you who they are, but we don't say their name aloud in blood bank because we're superstitious and we're afraid they'll come in. So we just call them the small ones. Oh no, she's here. Never prayed for an 8-gram hemoglobin so hard in my life. She has 17 antibodies. So we have to find a unit of blood that has none of those 17 antigens. The last one came from Seattle. Wow. So very hard. The more antibodies they find, the more difficult it is to give them blood. So what they try to do, increase their oxygen. The number one symptom of sickle cell crisis. Does anyone know what it is? Anyone familiar with the disease? What?
Joint pain.
Pain. Unremitting, unending pain. There's no, really the exterior symptoms aren't that bad, and as a matter of fact, it is a sad state of affairs, but especially, before the 60s and 70s, they would call them malingerers, they would call them liars, they would just say that they were making it up. They didn't understand or realize what was going on with these patients, but it is just unremitting pain. They come in and they hurt everywhere. So what they have to do is increase their oxygen, put them on oxygen, give them a lot of painkillers, and help them go on. Yes?
Is it due to the shape of the cell? Is it tearing anything? Is it should be tearing?
It's not tearing, it's due to the fact that it's blocking the capillaries, small capillary joints. Or small capillaries in the joints, I'm sorry. Wellness, lifestyle, basically if we find it early, you just try and manage and watch to make sure that they get exercise, get good nutrition, educate people on how to handle it. Avoid certain drugs. There are certain medications that if you give to a sickle cell patient, you'll induce a sickling crisis, which is not a good thing. There are some patients who have a very rare occurrence, and there are some patients who have a very common occurrence of this. There are some patients who are able to tolerate the pain well, and there are wusses who come in at the first hint of an ouchie. So they're just people, and they vary from how much they can handle. The prognosis is actually a lot better. The lifespan average used to be about 40. It's up to about 70 now, so it's really increased. And that's with some significant quality of life too. Not just that you live that long, but you can actually live a good life and not just be miserable and pain all the time.
Does increasing your body temperature help at all? Because I know with joint pain and arthritis.
Nope, not in this particular case. It's the oxygen. You've got to resaturate the blood cells with oxygen. That reverses the sickling, so the cells stop being sickled and go back to their regular shape.
Do Caucasian people usually
I usually bring this up, and it's usually a tread carefully kind of subject. Yes, they can. But that means they're not truly a nursing country. Right. You have to have some black ancestry somewhere. But with, interracial marriages are a lot more common now. They're more accepted. We're seeing some babies who do come out, they look like Caucasian, but they are coming out with sickle cell. Because a lot of times you have to remember, being black in America is a bad thing, can be a bad thing. Many years ago it was worse. We're getting better, but it was not uncommon for someone who was born with rather pale skin to leave their loved ones, give them a hug and a kiss and tell them I'll never see you again, and move somewhere else and pass for white. There are also, slave owners had mistresses. Thomas Jefferson had 8 kids. 4 of them were light-skinned, 4 of them were by his mistress. 4 of them were light-skinned and 4 of them were nursed. 4 of them were raised white, 4 of them were raised black. So mixed races have been a common thing for many years, especially in New Orleans and the French South. It was not uncommon to try and get a mistress. Mistresses were normal. And octoroons were extremely popular because these were someone who was an 8th black. It still made them less of a citizen, but it made them look more white. I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm just saying it is what it was. Yes.
I had a sickle cell patient who was like pregnant the whole time. She hurt and she was sick well. She was had all the pain all the time.
Yeah, it is, and
Maybe we can't do much for her pain.
no, because you can't give her the drugs while she's pregnant. Yeah. This is horrible. I mean, I've seen big, strong, tough guys sit there and whimper like they were 2-year-olds. I mean, this is horrible. It is not pleasant. It is not comfortable.
Yes, I might be early, but how can you tell the difference between sickle cell crisis and the sickle cell trait? Because there are patients that come in that are seekers and bounce around from hospital to hospital, use different names, and get their pain meds before the lab can say they're not in sickle cell crisis. So
How do we tell? Basically, we look at their morphology. It doesn't, the hemoglobin electrophoresis doesn't change. Their hemoglobin, the amount of hemoglobin they have. How do we tell the difference? Frankly, history. Most area hospitals know who.
so it's not going to be more sickle cells in a patient in crisis than
Not
there
always.
is.
We had one patient who came in and he was in pain. He was not a seeker. He was not a seeker. Is somebody who just comes in because they want to hit. And he was not a seeker. And his blood cell, I never saw a sickle cell in that patient. His morphology was so blasted normal, it was ridiculous. Never saw a sickle cell.
And how do you say that he wasn't a seeker and not just a good actor?
Personality, people knew him. There were, but you could link the episodes to incident that was happening. Yes.
I didn't see anything about kidney failure. I thought eventually that they had to have their kidneys transplanted or.
They can't, what happens is it's just like any other organ failure. They usually have multi-organ failure simply because anytime you cut off the blood flow to an organ, you're going to get an infarct. It eventually shuts down the kidneys simply because when you guys get to UA, you'll learn that the kidney functions basically by creating, it has a glomerulus, which is basically just a ball of capillaries. Well, if the sickle cells get into those and block it up, shuts down that glomerulus, shuts down that nephron. After you shut down enough of them, your kidney function falls.
Can't those open back up once they get oxygen?
Part of it is partially reversible, but sometimes the damage is irreparable. Once, just like a heart attack, once you've damaged a portion of the heart due to lack of oxygen, that doesn't necessarily grow back the way it's supposed to. So the damage is done. Now, can you reverse it somewhat? Yes, sometimes you can. Is it a permanent reversal? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But basically, there are limits to what we can do. There are limits to modern medicine. It would be nice if we could, cure everything, but we can't. So, what you want to do is support the patient, make sure they have quality of life. Try and keep them from going. It's always better to keep you well than to try and make you better. Yeah.
Have you heard of anything recently about nanotechnology in the medical field?
I've read a lot about it, but they haven't done anything with it on this yet. So I'll let them get to that. When it starts to come out and is useful and in use, then I'll put it in a class. But for right now, it's still experimental, so till something really comes of it, it's probably gonna hit the leukemias first. So, there really is not much they can do about this. They really recommend if you have sickle cell, you don't marry somebody else who has sickle cell. It's about all they can do for it. But good nutrition, good lifestyle, avoiding stress. Like I said, no skydiving. They recommend, like, if you're gonna go, we have one of our sickle cell patients was going to Denver, and they said take 5 days to drive there. He says, oh, it'll only take 1. They said, no, take 5 days to drive there. Drive to the bottom of the mountain, go up, stay someplace for a couple of days, let your body adjust, go up a little more, stay a couple of days, let your body adjust, go up a little more, and let your body adjust slowly. They said if you fly straight to Denver, you'll be in crisis in the hospital before you get out of the airport, just because of the difference in altitude between here and there. So, because he was what we call he was a real sickle. He sickled very easily. He went into crisis fairly easy, and we knew that because he would come in and his cells would, they'd be stretched out. We often see a lot of schistocytes. More than sickle cells, we see the schistocytes that are left over after they pop, after they're burst and destroyed. We screen for this in the PKU testing that we do in all babies. And they screen all babies because you just never know what genetically you're going to find working in there. It is part of our neonatal screening. We can also do a test called the Sickle Dex, which we will do in lab probably next week, because I've got to find some sickle positive patients that we can use. And all it does, though, the Sickle Dex will tell you whether there's any hemoglobin S present. It will not differentiate sickle cell trait from sickle cell disease. It just tells you there is hemoglobin S present, not how much of it there is. So our screen does not differentiate between trait. Like I said, lifespan has gotten a lot better. I started in 1990 at Memorial Hospital. We had a young man there, and he at the time was 11, I believe. His projected life was 16, maybe 18. He's now well into his 30s, and just treatment has gotten better, that much better over the course of the last 20 years. It is still horrible, it still hurt. There's nothing, you don't cure sickle cell disease. Bone marrow transplant has so many risks associated with it that it is not common, and it's not something that they're going to want to do unless it's really a last-ditch effort. But like I said, the lifespan has increased significantly. It used to be 30s and 40s was about as old as you would see a sickler, and now they live pretty much as long as everyone else. They are more prone to heart problems, they are more prone to stroke, joint problems and other things, but their lifespan has, with quality. And that's something that's important to remember, is that, if I live to be 90 years old and I have no quality of life, why do I want to live to be 90 years old? When I can't read anymore, will somebody please shoot me? Because that's exactly, I don't want to go on if I can't read. So, if I can't do the things I enjoy, am I living? So that's, so we're talking here that they have quality of life, not just quantity. Yeah, you're going to live, but you're going to be in pain and miserable, and you're not going to be able to breathe, you're not going to be able to do anything. Okay. So the expanded lifespan is good. The other hemoglobinopathies we really talk about, hemoglobin C. This is instead of, and you won't need this one, you don't need to know the substitution. But in this one, instead of valine for glutamic acid, we see a substitution of lysine for glutamic acid at position 6 of the beta chain. It is also inherited. This is predominant in people of West African descent. Sickle cell is pretty much throughout the tropical regions of Africa, but the hemoglobin C tends to be from those on the west coast or the western portion of the continent. It is a much more mild anemia. It does not have as near the symptoms. Again, it was formed, almost all of these hemoglobinopathies are the ones that are proliferate. Most of these were formed as a defense against malaria, which still kills millions of people every year. So that's why these hemoglobinopathies and these thalassaemias are around. Again, this is the one that has the crystals that can precipitate out. Well, you can see that if there's a big hunk of crystal in the middle of your red cell, the plasmodium does not have anywhere to get in. It can't live there. Okay. Hemoglobin E. Yeah, okay. The biggest thing with hemoglobin C, or the most significant factor with hemoglobin C, is when it hooks up with hemoglobin S. So you've got a patient who is one gene for hemoglobin S and one gene for hemoglobin C. So they don't have any normal hemoglobin. So SC disease is significantly less trauma and less problematic than homozygous sickle cell, but it is still more of a problem than SA, which is where you have one normal and one abnormal.
I wasn't here.
That's okay.
Are you saying that they are immune to malaria, or
Yeah.
just really?
Yeah, the hemoglobin S, I told them, normally you've got a blobby molecule. When there's a decrease in oxygen tension, causes polymerization, and so you've got these little fibers. Malaria can't move into the cell, which is why hemoglobin S, as nasty a disease as it is, actually genetically transferred down, because more people died of malaria.
Prefer it over there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, your choice, you can die of malaria or you can
Absolutely.
have sickle cell. Well, dead, dead is dead.
Just to reiterate, you said SC is better than sickle cell by itself?
SC is better than SS. SC is better than homozygous sickle cell. But it is still a problem. Hemoglobin E, this one is more predominant in people of Southeast Asian descent. It is generally asymptomatic. So why do we care? Because it's asymptomatic unless it's in conjunction with thalassemia. And we're going to talk about thalassemias in just a second. So this is just another abnormal hemoglobin. There are, and I don't remember the exact number, I want to say there's something like 50 significant hemoglobin variants. They've identified about 400 variants, but only about 15 of them are significant as far as making a change. All right, thalassemia. Yes, I did. All right, thalassemia. Thalassemia is from Greek for around the sea. So if you want to know where these people come from, you go find the Mediterranean Sea and you just sort of go around the edge of it. Basically, it initiated, they think, down with the Phoenicians. So anywhere the Phoenician traders went and, shall we say, spread their love, yeah, that's a good way of putting it, you're going to find thalassemias. So pretty much right around the entire Mediterranean. Southern Spain, Greece, Turkey, Southern Asia, Northern Africa. But seriously, you just look, that's basically where it comes from. Okay. It is inherited. It's a gene mutation that reduces or alters the synthesis of the affected globin chain. So what happens is, for some reason, in beta thalassemia, you have a genetic abnormality on chromosome 11, and you don't make enough beta chains. Okay? And what is the formula for normal adult hemoglobin? What chains are in it?
2 alpha and
But which two?
Two
alphas
alphas, 2 non.
and 2 betas. So if I don't have enough betas, got all these alphas hanging around and they ain't got nowhere to go. So what do? Well, they start hooking up with anything they can find. Okay? Which gives me a lot of hemoglobin F, a lot of hemoglobin A2, and some really weird ones that hang out there sometimes. Okay? Or the hemoglobin E also is another one that can be in there. If it is heterozygous, it's minor, it's thalassemia minor. And if it's homozygous, it's thalassemia major. Beta thalassemia major is known as Cooley's anemia. Beta thal minor, most of the time we don't know if you have it, except if for some reason we do hemoglobin electrophoresis, we'll find a little bit of an increased A2, maybe a little increased F, but for the most part, heterozygous in this case is not particularly symptomatic, unless, again, if you have some other disease state along with it. The thing about beta thal, it is evident in the first years of life, and I don't know how to say it. There are actual physical changes, and to me it looks like somebody took their finger and squished their nose in. Because what happens is the eyes get wide apart, they're set back, broad, wide forehead, set forward somewhat. There's an overbite, the jaws have an overbite. And the main reason for these changes is that there's excess hematopoiesis going on because you're constantly anemic, you're constantly hypoxic. So instead of like in a normal person, in a normal child as they grow, the hematopoiesis sort of goes out to the flat bones, goes out just to the ends of the long bones. It stays active everywhere, and as a matter of fact, the marrow channel actually expands and causes these physical abnormalities in these patients. It presents usually within the first year of life. Once your hemoglobin F is starting to be replaced by your hemoglobin, or supposed to be replaced by your hemoglobin A, so after about 3 months of age, when we start seeing this occur, they will have an enlarged spleen and an enlarged heart. The spleen because it's trying to take the abnormal cells out, and the enlarged heart because it's working so hard to try and pump the blood through. There will be a slight jaundice, and jaundice is associated with hemolytic anemias, which we'll talk more about later. Basically, you make weird cells with beta thal, just poikilocytosis in general. With sickle cells, you see a sickle cell or other type, target cells. Those are common. But with the thalassemia, they're just not right. In some cases, they're ovalocytes. Some cases, they're target cells. But most of the time, they're just not nice and normal. A lot of variation in size and shape. You'll see the bone deformities due to the overactive marrow, the flattened nose, the wide-set eyes. A protrusion of upper maxilla, basically you've got a severe overbite. You'll see heavy jaw frequently and a heavy brow line. And this is basically, I said, this is where the Phoenician traders went, and there you go, that's where you see it. You're going to see anemia, duh, that's what, yes.
The thalassemia, when you see the physical traits, could that be mistaken as Neanderthal traits, like prominent brow, things like that?
It might be, but basically you're not going to base anything just on the looks. It could just be an ugly kid too. So until we actually do some sort of screening, we're not going to call anything. We're going to see an increased RDW, which means what? What's an increased RDW associated with? Okay, well, we know that MCV has to do with our macro-micro, right? Our MCHC has to do with our hypo. What's our RDW have to do with? How far apart they are, our aniso. So you're gonna see anesocytosis, you're gonna see poikilocytosis. You're gonna see a variety of different cell shapes. Osmotic fragility is going to be decreased. Okay, we talked about osmotic fragility. Remember, if I put a red cell in a decreasing solution of salt concentration, at some point, so much water is going to get in there that it pops. These guys are a little more resistant to that. Okay, we're going to see increased reticulocytes, maybe even nervies. We're going to confirm it using hemoglobin electrophoresis. We're going to see increased A2 and F and a decrease in A. One thing, and you're going to want to know this, we aren't going to do this in lab, we aren't going to talk about it other than this. If you want to see how to do it, go to the less common hematology PowerPoint, I talk about it in there. Free erythrocyte protoporphyrin, or FEP, is going to be negative. The reason this is significant, FEP means that you made all these lovely protoporphyrin rings and you didn't have anything to hook into them. You're going to see those increase in iron deficiency anemia because you don't have anything to hook to them. In this, you're making enough of the globin chains, they're just the wrong kind of globin chains, they're just weird. So normally when we have a few deltas, a few gammas, we have a bunch of alphas, and normally we have a bunch of betas. So what happens is all these alphas hook up with most of the betas, and there's just a few that hook up with these weird ones over off to the side. When we get this kind of conflagration, what happens is we don't have enough beta chains. So our hemoglobin A is alpha beta. Okay. Hemoglobin F is alpha gamma. And our hemoglobin A2 is alpha delta. Well, we also get things like, well, the alphas can't hook up with everything, so maybe some of our gammas will hook up together, or our gammas and our deltas will hook up together. So we get hemoglobins without an alpha chain, but not very good at carrying hemoglobin. And we'll also see alpha chain precipitates. Some of these extra alpha chains, they'll just hang around, they don't have anybody to play with. So they're lonely. But mostly what we see are increased A2 and F. And where am I going to see those? Where do I measure those? What test that we talked about measures my A2 and my F? The electrophoresis. The electrophoresis is going to measure my quantities of A2 and F. How do we handle it? There's generally splenectomy, because your spleen doesn't like cells that aren't normal, and most of your cells in beta thalassemia aren't normal, so your spleen is trying to take them all out. Well, if that's all you got, you gotta live with them. So a lot of times they'll remove the spleen so it does not take out as many cells. Transfusion if necessary, just for supportive therapy, and drug therapies. There have been a variety. I don't think any of them are particularly notable at this time. If anybody finds out differently, please let me know. But I don't have time to research every disease state and what the latest is. Other beta thalassemias. Okay, this is Cooley's anemia. This is beta thal major. We've got some other beta thals that we can get. Hereditary persistence of fetal hemoglobin. We do a stain that we're gonna count these either tomorrow or next week, depends on when I can get some slides. Called a Kleihauer-Betke stain, or a KB stain, or just a Kleihauer stain. And what this does is it stains fetal hemoglobin. What we use it for most of the time is to check and see if baby bled into mom after birth or at delivery. What we do is we'll take mom's blood and we'll stain it with this particular stain. Baby cells will look like a little piece of hard candy. They're dark, shiny little cells. And so I can tell them from mom's more ghostly pale little cells. It's important, if I have a mother who's Rh negative, that if baby had a big bleed, we need to make sure we give her plenty of Rogaine. and I'll let Barb talk with you more about that. Being the unlucky soul that I am, I've actually seen a case of this because the first Clyde-Hauer I ever did all by myself on the weekend when I was clerking, every cell was a baby cell. Every cell. My boss, who was working with me, because I couldn't work by myself with blood bank yet, it wasn't a tech, she said, I don't know what you did, so she said, do it again. I did it again. Every cell was a baby cell. So she was very frustrated and very upset and very angry with me. So she did it. Lady had persistent hemoglobin. Is it significant? No. Does it have any symptoms? No. It just screws with you when you're doing the Clyde-Hauer slide. She actually, the supervisor apologized. She had like 98% fetal hemoglobin.
Were you doing it because she had a baby?
We did it because she had a baby. I was looking to see if the baby had bled in. They just gave her a big old honking shot of rhodium. They're like, we have no idea. So maximum dose is 5 vials. That's what you're getting, honey. Because it's better safe than sorry. But yeah. But it's totally asymptomatic. The only time, again, you've got to remember, mommies and daddies can share. So if you get a nice thalassemia and a nice sickle cell together, you get all kinds of crud. Okay, so these things come up. Where they're really a problem is when they get into recombinations, just like the hemoglobin E. By itself, hemoglobin E is usually asymptomatic and not particularly a problem. Match it with a thalassemia who's already got issues, and you're compounding the problem, you do start to see issues. Yes?
There are certain states that require blood testing before they allow marriage license to be released.
Not
Is
anymore.
this what they were looking for then?
No, they were dealing with baby and a bunch of other stuff. And no, they don't anymore because it's a no. Hemoglobin liquor. What happens here is, this is just one of our abnormal cells. Your deltas and your betas, because you don't have a lot of betas, your deltas will go over and kind of grab onto a beta, and they'll kind of hook up, and then the alpha will hook up with the pair. Okay? And so this makes your hemoglobin liquor. It's not as good an oxygen carrier as a lot of the other hemoglobins. How do we find it? Usually we're doing a hemoglobin electrophoresis for something else. I'll go, that's a weird one, wonder what it is. And they'll send it off for more testing and find out what it is. That's the beta thalassemias. This is chromosome 11. This is going to be a loss of beta chains. This is going to be a decrease in your beta chains because you're not making enough of them. Alpha thal. Alpha thalassemia. The alpha chains are so important that we have not one gene to control them, but 2. So in order for you to have a problem with your alpha thalassemia, you have to be missing a lot. So basically what we can have is we have 4 levels of alpha thalassemia. The first is a carrier state, where you're just missing 1. Okay? You got plenty, you got 2 good ones from mommy, but daddy's a little short. Okay? So you're short 1. It is totally insignificant. You will not find it. They don't even go looking for it. Okay? What happens then is what really becomes an issue is if you lose 1 more. Excuse me. Missing 2 alpha genes, either both from one parent or one from each, which is obviously, this is going to be the much more common because this person isn't really well. So this is our alpha thalassemia trait. It is a very mild microhypoanemia. Usually hemoglobins linger between the 10 and 13 mark, okay, even in men, so it's just a little bit low. You're going to see weird cells. You make a slide and they look funky. We had a resident who came down. He was terrified. He thought he was going to die because, of course, when you're in residency, you had to look at your own slide. He was all freaked out. It's the only way he found out he had it. He'd been an athlete. He was fine, and he saw his cells and freaked out. No, he's fine. He just had alpha thalassemia trait. Hemoglobin H disease, and we see an increase of this in the Asian populations, especially Southern Asia. You're going to see a moderate chronic microhypoanemia. And in hemoglobin H disease, we are missing three genes. So we're only making a quarter of the alpha chains that we're supposed to. Remember, we have to have 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. With our beta thalassemia, we've got some gammas and some deltas and some other guys that are kind of hanging around, right? With the alpha chains, there is no other alpha chain. So what happens, we wind up with a moderate chronic anemia, increased reticulocytes, hyperplasia of the bone marrow, and splenomegaly. We're going to see really bizarre looking cells. These people live with an anemia their whole life. The biggest, or the worst one, is when you lose all of your alpha chains. This produces something called hydrops fetalis. And hydrops fetalis is fatal to the infant. Because if you remember back when we talked about, all the way back last week, when we talked about the hemoglobin chains, what is the alpha chain that is in the in utero hemoglobins?
Zeta and
Zeta. Once you lose your zeta chain, you can't make hemoglobin. About the only ones that'll hook up, the gammas will hook up with each other. So you'll get something called hemoglobin BART, which is this one right here, where 4 of our gammas hook up. Maybe they can carry something, and they can't. So unfortunately, what happens is once the baby has progressed to needing adult alpha chains, once they've started going to hemoglobin F, what happens is you wind up with this hemoglobin BART. They are either stillborn or they die shortly after birth. Usually they make it to about 3 or 4 months gestation okay, and then after that, if they make it all the way to birth, they won't live very long because there's no oxygen carrying capacity. So it is a big disease.
This is chromosome 16, right?
This would be chromosome 16.
Are they born normal? Or are there like abnormalities in the way that they appear because they are lacking?
I would assume, I don't know 100% sure, but I would assume you're going to see, you don't have oxygen.
Right.
So anytime you have a lack of oxygen, you're going to see some sort of abnormalities. I'm assuming you'd see organ failure, might see physical changes, definitely going to see mental changes. Probably not, the brain won't develop. One of the big things we have to be able to do is tell the difference between thalassemia and iron deficiency anemia. Because they are both microhypo, we do find people get them confused. So how are we going to tell the difference? Well, what do you think the number one thing we're going to do is? We do iron studies. Why? Because they're cheap. Okay. If your iron is normal, is it iron deficiency anemia? Probably not. Okay. We can do bone marrow iron stains. We can do hemoglobin electrophoresis, because if I do hemoglobin electrophoresis, I'm going to find abnormal hemoglobins in patients who have thalassemias. What am I going to find in patients with iron deficiency anemia? Normal hemoglobins. Unless, of course, they have thalassemia and iron deficiency anemia at the same time, or sickle cell and iron deficiency anemia at the same time. It's always fun, because, it would be nice if these people would only have one disease at a time. It unfortunately does not work that way. We can do that FEP. This is another another one that we're going to, that you can do. We don't do it very often. Yes?
Hemoglobin electrophoresis will tell you exactly which genes that they've got there, correct?
Nope, it'll just tell me what hemoglobins I've got. There's a variety of different genes that can be responsible. My FEP is going to be increased in iron deficiency anemia because I'm making my protoporphyrin rings and I ain't got nothing to hook onto them. In my thalassemia, my FEP is going to be normal because I'm making my protoporphyrin rings and I got stuff to hook onto them. It's just weird and not right. There are other screens that we can do. We can do the sickle. We can do, the other thing is the age. If you've got thalassemia, you're born with thalassemia. Okay, iron deficiency, that one can develop later on. So if you've been perfectly healthy for the first, 30 years, it's probably not thalassemia. Could it be? Yeah. Could you have been totally asymptomatic for 30 years? Sure. Is it likely? No, probably not. At some point, somebody probably did a CBC and probably looked at a slide and probably went, yeah. But like I said, thalassemia, especially thalassemia minor, can be totally asymptomatic. And you can live a nice long life without any kind of problem whatsoever. You'll be slightly anemic in many of these cases, but what did we talk about with iron deficiency anemia? That can your body adapt to that slight hypoxia? Easily. Some, you can have thalassemia and be an athlete. You can have thalassemia and go skydiving. It's not like we have to worry about sickle cell where you're going to induce the hypoxia is going to induce sickling. So these things are not death sentences. It's just modified lifestyles. And you have to be careful to make sure that if you do have them, if you've got thalassemia, you probably need to make sure you take a little extra iron because you're going to be losing a little bit of extra blood cells just through the spleen removing them. Any questions? What's the difference between hemoglobinopathy and thalassemia? How is thalassemia unique amongst the hemoglobinopathies? What causes the thalassemia? They're all genetic diseases. But what's the difference between the other hemoglobinopathies and the thalassemias? The sickle cell, hemoglobin C, you're making cells, but they are abnormal hemoglobins. The structure of the hemoglobin itself is abnormal. And this is all based on the globin chain. So the structure of the globin chain is abnormal. In thalassemias, the globin chains themselves are normal. They're nice, normal globin chains. The problem is you're not making enough of them. If you've got alpha thal, you're not making enough alpha chains. If you've got beta thal, you're not making enough beta chains. Okay? So in a straight hemoglobinopathy, abnormal hemoglobins. In a thalassemia, normal chains, abnormal mix rate. Okay? You don't have the right amount of them. So like our sickle cell, they make plenty of chains, they're just not normal. In our thalassemias, they don't make enough, but the chains themselves are normal. So does that make sense? There's a lot of stuff. These anemias are, there's so many different variations of them. You've got to be able to keep them straight. Next week's test is going to have anemias on the case studies. We're going to move away from the whites and into the reds. So make sure that you maybe can find some clues as to what the anemia is going to be based on a variety of, read the patient history. What kind of things in patient history might point us towards one thing or another? Age? What else?
Ethnicity.
Ethnicity. What else? Race, ethnicity, something. What's that? Family history. symptoms. If I tell you the patient came in and was in severe pain, what's your first guess gonna be, even with nothing else?
Sickle.
Sickle cell. So there's always gonna be little clues. How are we going to screen for sickle cell? How are we gonna screen for it? The sickle X. How are we gonna confirm it? With electrophoresis. What's the substitution in sickle cell anemia?
Something on the
Bailey.
6.
Valine for glutamic acid at position 6 of the beta chain. You ought to just start reciting that to yourself for a while, guys, because in case you hadn't figured it out, it's coming. All right, let's see. I have EKR, CLM, TMB, KNM, NRM, AGS, JLH, PKR. Who else am I missing? That's your initials, in case you couldn't figure it out.
CWP.
CWP. LAM. No.
Did you do LLS?
Yep, I got y'all now. All right, the other thing we're going to start today is we're going to start XP training. I'm going to reach into the barrel of chips. We're going to be matching you up over the next couple weeks. And we're going to just do it at random. So I'm going to reach into the barrel of chips. I'm going to snag out a name. And you're going to be the unlucky first person. Or maybe the lucky first person. Because we're going to play the grapevine game. I have a much better checklist this year than I did last year. It wasn't particularly successful last year. By the time we got to the end, several of them didn't even know how to run it. So training was not successful. Okay. So what we're going to do, I have a training checklist. I'm going to take one of you. I'm going to go over the training checklist with you. We're going to do the daily, the weekly maintenance. We're going to discuss the basic properties of the machine and how to run it and how to do QC and that kind of thing. What you're going to do then is you're going to grab the next person in line and you're going to teach them. At the end of this little game, somebody's going to teach Melissa. And then Melissa's going to come back to me and tell me if she got everything out that came from the beginning. Okay? So treat this seriously because this is going to be a grade as a lab, as a whole. So if one of you falls short, you are going to doom all of you. Okay? So you have to make sure you're listening. You have to make sure you ask questions. If you don't understand, don't smile and nod. Oh yeah, I get it. You need to really get it. Now, if you are training and you forget something, who are you going to go see? The person who trained you. And if they don't know, who are they going to go see? All the way back up the line till you get back to me. I'm the last person you ask. So if there's something you're supposed to be training and you don't know what it is or you've forgotten what it is, you're going to go get whoever trained you and ask them. If they don't know, they've got to go find who trained them and go back up. Why? Because that's going to tell me where the breakdown was. Now, is there something you're going to forget between me training and the end? Of course there is. There's a lot of information. So I don't expect it to be perfect at the end, but I do expect it to be at least enough to check off all the boxes on the checklist. You will sign it, and then you can put that training checklist in your portfolio. All right, take about 10 minutes. I will see you next door.